Now the fact is, we cannot understand our own times unless we understand this. If we think that the past was simple, we imagine that the present must be simple. And I think that one of the great enemies of making progress in this country is imagining that there are simple answers to things. And we hear it all the time. Everybody needs something that's going to fit on a bumper sticker. And that comes in part from imagining that the past was simple. So if we can, just for a moment at least, with no particular political purpose in mind, of course, but allow people to imagine themselves into the confusing and multifarious and conflict-ridden past, I think that we can actually help them have confidence that today is not something unprecedented, that this is what human life always feels like, and that we can make something better out of this than we have now. You know, it's nothing like living your life in slavery and the Civil War and Reconstruction to make even 2011 look a lot better. Because frankly, compared to the struggles that we're reading about here, compared to 200 years of slavery, compared to the suffering that you read about here, we can manage the things that we're confronting today. So I mean for there to be a hopeful message to this, even though it seems like a strange thing to confront so much sadness and sorrow. I think it actually has a beneficial effect on us. Because yesterday was the same way, and tomorrow will be as well. The two great dangers: one, we can pine for a past that we imagine being like a Pepperidge Farm commercial, where everybody got along, and we didn't have any of these problems back then. All you have to do is go read a newspaper from any year in the 19th century and realize the things that we take for granted now as being fixed that were horribly shaped. But we also cannot condescend to the past, that life is so much more complex now than back then. I'm not sure what's been more complex in American history than things we're reading about and what we're talking about tomorrow. What are you supposed to do about the largest system of slavery in the modern world in your nation? What are you supposed to do about that? What's more complicated as a political problem than that? So it's essential for our self-understanding that we recognize what history looks like in the case of the greatest challenge that we've ever faced. Now that said, you notice that I do love the history produced by historians. That I wanted to have what a lot of people look to us for, an authoritative story by somebody who's studied this for a long time and whom we trust. And James McPherson fits that category. I didn't really have to think too hard about what Civil War book I wanted to use, because I've always thought that McPherson's book is sort of a model of how you could deal with the political and the military and the social and the moral and the international developments all in the short compass of one book, and show the way that a single battle could resonate through all the different facets of society. You know, and then in a perverse way, and to show how much I honor him, I put in another article that says he's wrong. That's kind of tough love that historians like, you know, because we actually don't feel that it's wrong. It's just another way of looking at this. So Gary Gallagher looks at this and says, they sure did keep fighting for a long time if they had lost. You know, what was lost? Did they know that was lost? So it's kind of like that Braxton Bragg thing after Antietam a few months earlier. Is it a turning point if people at the time don't accept it as a turning point? Then you look at Drew Faust's book, and this Republic of Suffering, one, I think probably the Civil War book that's received the most attention in the last 5 years. And comes to us with the profound question that it's hard to believe that out of 50,000 books that we've never really addressed directly before, what did death mean? In a war that kills 620,000 people, the equivalent of 6 million people today, why did it take us this long to think, what does death mean to people? So that's there not as a critique of McPherson or any way, but just to show that there are new ways to think about even the most central issues in all this. So having McPherson and Gallagher and Faust, I think we have three of the best Civil War historians that we have represented in this reading. The final selections on emancipation are probably the newest elements in our reading. Now, we've long argued about what did Abraham Lincoln really believe. Well, if you've read that last part, you can see he really believed several different things. But he believed them not because he was flip-flopping or he didn't have backbone to take one position and stick to it no matter what, but because he was constantly adjusting to changing situations. He was trying to save the Union and end slavery, and as he said, he would do whatever it took. Your heart must sink as you read that first thing in that last part where he's telling the African-American ministers, maybe it'd be just best if you just left. And people look at this and go, aha, I told you he was a hypocrite. He didn't really believe it. Now, this is something that's interesting, the racial politics about all this, because you'll find people on the far right, conservatives, who want to attack Lincoln for being the precursor to the Leviathan state, and they hate him. But some African-American scholars look at this and say, look at the hypocrisy here. It's because we freed ourselves. It wasn't something Abraham Lincoln did. I think that the scholarship today is, Eric Foner's book that we recommended here does a great job of showing how these things weave together. But I don't think that we've really wrapped our minds around how hard it was to be Abraham Lincoln. A fact that I often use is that 1864, the same percentage of white northern men voted for Abraham Lincoln as had voted for him in 1860. After all the great battles, all the great victories, after the Gettysburg Address, over 40% of white northern men still will not vote for Abraham Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War. And that helps understand why is he saying the things that he does. I love that letter. It's kind of spunky. You know, yeah, what would you have me do? How about this? You want to do that? No. You want to do this? And that sounds to me like his authentic voice of what he would have been like on the stump. He couldn't be there, so he just kind of wrote a stump argument back and forth. But I think if you realize that in August of 1864, he did not even think he was going to be renominated. You get some sense of the depth of the despair that they were experiencing. And also some sense of why maybe the war did not turn entirely after Antietam, but instead the Confederates were fighting for the election of 1864, in which they could come with some kind of negotiated peace. You can see Lincoln's talking about that. So one of the things that we chose the Lincoln selections, because these are things that people debate a long time, but people don't really know what they think. And here, read 10 pages of what Lincoln himself said, instead of just having an opinion about it, and see how his ideas changed and grew and developed. We also see that Frederick Douglass changed his mind. You know, one of the most powerful things you'll ever read. What is this to the slave? Is your 4th of July? Whew, you get into that. And that's stronger than anything you're going to hear on cable television these days, right? But a decade later, let's go. Now, we can believe that maybe this scourge of slavery will come to an end. Let's go fight for it. He had not felt that way even in 1860. So the abolitionists don't respect the Republicans in 1860. Important thing for people to understand who want to go back and tidy it all up. Instead, there's these divisions there even then. The role of African Americans was central to the war and its aftermath, but their freedom was not a simple breaking of the shackles. One of the things I love about Jubilee is what happens the day after you're free. You know, or reading the account of that David Blight just discovered of that man who writes that memoir in the 1870s about what it was like. How do you become free for living in Fredericksburg, Civil War Central? And you can see the Union Army, but there's still Confederate soldiers. How do you make yourself free? I love it. It gives the keys back to the woman who owns it. You know, little details like that that really make it sing. How do we imagine ourselves into that freedom? What was it like to become free with nothing but the shirt on your back? How do you make a life out of nothing? One of the things we tend to forget is that African Americans are the most successful post-emancipation population in modern history. They've taken, and the heartbreaking things of Union soldiers jeering at their black comrades as they're getting ready to go off and die in enormous numbers. So you'll see one of these things here that I'm sympathetic to everybody, but don't want to hold up anybody as a cardboard hero. Everybody, we need to think about what were they thinking about? Why would they say this thing? Because they seem to have been human.